What is the best live-action Spider-Man suit? Well, that's a great question. With the wall crawler about to get his third silver screen reboot, I'm going to compare and contrast all of Peter Parker's big-budget costumes. You see, in the long-ago days of 2002, director Sam Raimi took on the monumental task of bringing Spider-Man to life in his first major motion picture. Now, this was only 2 years after Bryan Singer's X-Men movie, where the cast of mutants got Matrix-inspired / Batman 1989 solid black leather costumes and rejected their brightly colored comic book origins. Fun Spidey fact: designer James Atkinson, who later went on to design Superman's suit in Man of Steel, wore by Henry Cavill, he had an earlier concept of the red Spider-Man symbol on top of a black suit that was probably similar to the design that Miles Morales wears in the comic books today. But rather than doing something like that, Sam Raimi kept Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man in a blue and red costume that I think looks awesome to this very day. This costume even carried over the iconic webbing design that intuitively draws the eye down the body and often makes Spider-Man appear smaller and sleeker than he really is, like he's posing less of a threat than someone as big as the Hulk or the Juggernaut might. And that's something I really like in my Spideys. I like my Spideys to be thin and sleek. In the Raimi costume, the webbing isn't just a cool black design. It's more of a raised silver / gray that actually lends a texture to the Spider-Man suit when it's rendered in CG. Also, it helps to define the red color on the costume for the film camera. Now, one place on the costume where many fans might say that Raimi diverged the most from Spider-Man's comic book roots was not giving Peter his web shooters. In script, he has organic webbing that originates from his wrists, rendering the web shooters moot. Now, this change remains divisive among fans to this very day. I actually rather like it because I think it helps to simplify Peter Parker's story, especially since this was the first movie that we'd ever had with this character. Also, the original Raimi suit is noted for the white reflective lenses that do not articulate the way that fans were used to seeing in many of the Steve Ditko Spider-Man comics or cartoons, and it has a very smallish spider symbol on the chest. It's also interesting to note how triangular Spider-Man's eyes are in this costume, as the film versions of Spider-Man's costume would later go on to be more circular. Oh, and one other final fun fact: 4 of these costumes were actually stolen during filming, and Sony Pictures offered $25,000 for their return. They were actually discovered 18 months later, and they had been stolen by a security guard. I guess this was a security guard that liked to dress up as Spider-Man. Now, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man costume, I think, is a perfect design, especially for Spider-Man's introductory movie. But later versions of Spider-Man's suit on screen, I think, would actually improve the design. So 10 years after Spider-Man made his big screen debut under Sam Raimi's helm, Andrew Garfield took over the role in the 2012 reboot The Amazing Spider-Man, and he got a whole new suit for the occasion. Now, director Mark Webb admitted to feeling responsibility to actually reinvent Spider-Man, especially in a post-Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy world. He wanted to leave the audiences asking the question, how could a kid have made that costume? And one of the cornerstones of this idea was to bring back Peter's original web shooters that are actually featured on the outer wrists of the costume. The Spidey symbol is much larger on this Amazing Spider-Man 1 suit, and it features a sleeker design than what has been seen previously in the Sam Raimi suits. The rest of the costume is covered in this kind of darker mesh that's often referred to by many in the production as looking like a basketball, and it gives the costume a darker and a more gritty aesthetic. It's a very, very dark costume. The Amazing Spider-Man suits also incorporates elements from actual clothing at the time, including sneaker soles on the bottom of his boots, and his lenses are actually sunglass lenses that were incorporated into the mask, making Spider-Man's eyes a lot smaller than we'd seen previously on film. Now, another fun Spidey fact, Andrew Garfield is actually a massive Spider-Man fan, and he admitted that he actually cried the first time he put on the suit, and he tried to imagine a much better actor in the suit to keep himself from being overwhelmed. Later, he admitted to wearing absolutely nothing underneath the costume because it was so tight, leading to it being very uncomfortable. So just fun fact, if you ever watch those Amazing Spider-Man movies again, Andrew Garfield naked in every scene underneath that costume. I am not a fan of the Amazing Spider-Man 1 costume at all. I think it is overcomplicated. I really don't like the eyes, especially in some scenes how they turn out to be yellow, and I think this costume is overly too dark and overly designed, which is why I was so glad that because of all the fan criticism, Webb's suit was sent back to the Sony R&D, as I call it, and a comic book costume clone was produced in time for the Amazing Spider-Man 2. This costume in Amazing Spider-Man 2 might be the best on-screen Spider-Man costume that's ever been used in a film. The Spidey symbol on the chest is very similar to the previous one from 1. It's very large, but it's been scaled up, and Spider-Man's eyes are enlarged to be almost Todd McFarlane proportion. But it has pure red, pure blue, and looks the most like the comic book costume we've ever seen. I really love this costume. I don't love that movie, but I really love that costume. And next we arrive at 2016 with Spider-Man's first foray into the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Captain America: Civil War. Now Tom Holland, he plays Peter Parker for the current day, and he gets a cool new Tony Stark designed suit to do it in. Director Joe Russo stated that they wanted a slightly more traditional Steve Ditko influenced suit for their version of the wall crawler. Now the black webbing that has been a staple for all movie Spider-Man is definitely in place in this MCU costume, but it's more subtle and kind of painterly in a style that kind of evokes comic book artist Alex Ross's famous Spider-Man pinups. The MCU suit is also the first we've ever seen Spider-Man have articulated eyes. Now, I likely think that this was influenced by the popularity of Deadpool's eyes in his slow flicks, how they would change to the emotion and the reaction of the scene, and this gives Spidey the widest range of expressions he's ever had under the mask. Now, by contrast, the symbol on the chest is the smallest Spidey symbol we've ever had on screen, which is actually kind of a mixed bag for me, but it does harken back to the original days of the Amazing Spider-Man title. Now, fun fact, for the very first time on film, the back of the spider suit features the bright red Spider-Man symbol, so he actually has 360 degrees of spider-friendly neighborhood Spider-Man branding. Another detail that sets the MCU Spider-Man costume apart is the black detailing that you can see along Peter's torso and on his arms leading down towards his web shooters, especially those little lines that you can see on the blue. Now this is a thicker, harsher black line. I kind of think this might be an aesthetic choice to visually differentiate this costume from previous live-action Spider versions, or it might be an aesthetic choice to lean it more towards this is definitely a costume that Tony Stark designed. Something the film production team is not mixed on is it seems that the mechanical web shooters are likely to remain for all Spidey MCU suits going forward, although this is the first time that his web cartridges can easily be spotted around his wrists, and also there's extra ones on his belt. Now that SpiderMan Homecoming is opening in theaters, director Jon Watts has actually talked a lot about the practical and physical enhancements that are sure to come into play, but beyond that, it seems to basically be the same suit that we see Spidey wearing during the airport fight in Captain America: Civil War. Now, I think when we all saw Spider-Man in this suit in Civil War in the first trailer, I think we all freaked, especially when his eyes move. There are some other design elements that do make it a little bit overcomplicated, especially like the little marks on his shoulders and around his boots, extra black parts that actually just seem to do nothing but like, hey, it's a different Spider-Man costume over here, yo! But this is a fun suit, and I do think it really speaks towards this is a Tony Stark design suit. Looking back at all of the Spider-Man live-action suits, it's clear that there is a formula that kind of goes into the successful design. Keep it blue, keep it red, make it light on the web design, the bigger the logo the better, except when we're in Civil War. Articulated eyes and mechanical web shooters are gonna line the future. But with Tony Stark being responsible for this Spider-Man suit, that does mean that we could receive a lot of new Spider-Man suits in the future, especially since Tony Stark has never had the same Iron Man armor in any movie. Maybe that's gonna be the same for his Spider-Man mentee. How about we see on screen sometime the Scarlet Spider suit? That would be a very simple design to adapt. We could also see the black suit come back with actually looking like it was supposed to be in the comic books and not just a black version of the Sam Raimi suit. Also, how about the Iron Spider suit, which would take inspiration from Tony Stark's very color scheme. I gotta tell you, I would be completely surprised that we don't see some of these Spider-Man suits in future Spider-Man Homecoming sequels. So if you like this video, how about checking out some of our best Spider-Man stories ever? You can click on some of the videos on the screen, it'll take you right to some of our choices, and also click subscribe for more future nerdy videos. I'm Jason Inman, thank you for watching.